Hello, everyone. This is the very first edition of a new micro webinar series that we currently call From Mindshift to Modeshift. It's really all about figuring out how we get people out of their personal cars. But I said we currently call it From Mindshift to Modeshift because we have 3 people from MoveMe's team right now in this call, and we don't exactly agree whether or not Mindshift comes first or Modeshift comes first. So everybody probably knows me, Sandra Phillips, founder of MoveMe. Been working at this problem since 2010, and I would say it's a real big challenge on figuring out what comes first. But I don't want to start with my story first. So I'm actually going to ask Natalia, who is the latest addition to the MoveMe team, to introduce herself and a little bit of her thoughts and work around this topic.
Hi, everyone. I'm a behavioral scientist at MoveMe, and I'm delighted to be asked that question. What is Mindshift to Modeshift? For me, Mindshift suggests a change of mind. So for me, there's a notion of consciousness and there's a notion of beliefs and attitudes. So for me, this is a question of from change of beliefs and attitudes to Modeshift, which would be a change of behaviors. People actually start doing things differently. What should be first? It's a chicken and egg problem that I think we'll touch a little bit more in a minute. I'll let Venkatesh reply to this question. What is Mindshift and Modeshift?
Hey, thank you, Natalia and Sandra. Delighted to be here too. This is Venkatesh Gopal from MoveMe. And yeah, my take about Mindshift is about most of our decisions is led by we assuming that we are rational in thinking. And many of us think about how, maybe we look before we leap or we think before we do. That's what goes on paper. But many times people just jump off the cliff, right? So people take the leap without thinking and then go back, put it on paper that actually, you know what, I thought about it the way I did it. So for me, in transportation, Mindshift and Modeshift is correlated, but not necessarily one is a cause of the other all the time. Mindshift to me is something around we thinking how we would want to go about our commuting and our transportation choices. Whether we do it or not, it's completely different. But at least we've started thinking that we need to change it for the better or worse. And Modeshift is we actually doing it. So let's see how this discussion goes.
Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting because I think both of you highlight that one is like what the individual wants to do, and then the other one is what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and then the other one is actually what they're doing in real life. And I think Modeshift also has, for me anyway, initially actually that term for me came up with cities, and cities have these Modeshift targets, right? And really want to mandate people. They want to shift people out of their personal cars onto, let's say, active transportation or shared mobility. And they have a set target, like 10% of all personally driven single occupancy driven cars trips are shifted onto a different mode. So there's this like, let's put some targets and then work from these targets on like, what do we change in the system so people actually then make that change and change their minds of like, or their feeling towards cycling, all of a sudden you feel safer. So that's where I first came across the term Modeshift and was like, interesting. There's some targets, which to be very honest, sometimes seem very disconnected with what's actually going on in reality. I know they're normally long-term targets, so it takes a long time to change, like especially because they're working on infrastructure, right, and systems. The other time I was like, I finally understand the connection is, and I'm going back to my early days of Sherman, was with Car2Go. Because when I first started with Car2Go in 2010, I looked at whether or not Vancouver would be a viable market for Car2Go. And at the time, there were two car share providers, Zipcar and Modo, and they had about 7,500 members, okay? So not very many, and a couple hundred cars. And then obviously the decision was Vancouver is a good market, let's launch. We ran a mini pilot with 15 cars, which you cannot do free floating with 15 cars, just in case anybody wonders, doesn't work, but whatever. We had a mini pilot that basically allowed everybody to feel comfortable. The city made some changes to the rules around who can get exemptions to park in front of residential streets, and that allowed Car2Go to start. Now, within 4 years of Car2Go, the car share membership increased, and it increased across the board, not just for Car2Go, but also for the two previous providers, Modo and Zipcar. And I think within about 6 years, a third of the Vancouver population used car share. So that's about 200 and something thousand. And that's when I'm like, now you have real Mindshift and real Modeshift, because it's a snowball effect or an avalanche. Once it started moving, like in the early days, I would go to a party and said I drove with a car share car, and it was like, what the heck is that? And then years later, I would go to the party and they're like, I Car2Go, I Evo'd. It wasn't even like I car share. I use one of the two services that's available. So that's, I think, when there's real, it's at scale. What I'm trying to say, the system became reliable enough that they happen at scale. So these are my thoughts around Mindshift and Modeshift and my examples. But as I said, it was a fun debate, and we've been having this fun debate for a couple of weeks. What is it really that makes it? And so I want to pick up on something, Natalia, you said. You were talking about the emotional connection to a certain degree, right? That we all have. And transportation is quite the sticky one. It's like this on autopilot, I don't even know if people have an emotional connection unless you take their cars away. Then they have very strong emotional connections. But I don't even know if people actually feel anything. I don't know what your work or research has shown on that.
People, our transport behaviors are habitual. That means we kind of, for us, we do them on an autopilot. We do not think about them. We do not wonder every morning, how am I going to go to work? Most of the times, unless there is some kind of a disruption, there's a strike, there's a road closure, there is a COVID, that's where we kind of stop and they're like, oh, okay, how am I going to go to work today? And I think you touched on something really interesting on how these providers, they kind of grew, and they kind of built the infrastructure. So they created the conditions for people to change their behaviors, but then there must have been some triggers to get them. It could have been a person that spoke with them at a party. It could have been, their car broke. It could have been just, something else that kind of threw them off their usual automatic thinking, and that kind of made them, oh, there is something available. I've already heard other people use it. So, social norms validated by others. And then I feel confident, it's good, I can do it. And then they made a switch. Another way to kind of make that switch is to be a passenger of a car share or public transport. It's this idea of experiential learning. We can tell people, car share is good, car share is great, but it won't work because they have not experienced it, and they will keep having their preconceptions, and they will stick to their beliefs unless they experience it. Once they experience it, that's where they can say, actually, it works, it's smooth, it's easy, I could do it too.
Yeah, I was mentioning experiential learning is something that I've heard back when I used to work with automotive industry, and it used to be like experiential marketing, right? So taking people on off-road trips to show that you have this really nice little off-road gear that your car is able to do, right? And that's usually how the brands have been thinking, and I think it does make sense. There is proof in that. But also, when you talk about, I mean, you both spoke about, Sandra, you spoke about visibility, because there's more cars on the road, more people using it, right? So you see a lot of other people doing it. Oh, why not I do it? So there's that visibility. There's peer pressure. So that person, oh, why can't I be cool like that person who's car shared and is talking all about it, and I can't talk about it, right? And then Natalia, you mentioned social proofing. Aren't those mind shifts? So that's happening before, and that's causing the most shift, is it not?
I think we need multiple things have to happen at the same time, and that's what's really difficult. We need multiple pressure points. We need the infrastructure. We need people who know how to use it. We need people to. We need the other mode, shared car or cycling, to be visible, and then we need people to actually try it. So, how do we get there? I think a really nice example is Paris and the transformation that the city underwent recently. And it really, you've got all the elements that we've just said. Right now in Paris, there are more bicycles than cars. How did it happen in the last 4 years? Well, it's COVID. COVID brought everything to standstill, but also, so people had to reevaluate how they move around. Cities had to reevaluate how people move around, and they had to prepare for the fact that some people were afraid of using public transport, and not everyone could jump on their car. That would make no sense. So Paris capitalized on that, created temporary infrastructure, which allowed people to experience it. Okay, I can do it. Then they would invest in a bicycle. More people would show up at the school gates with bicycles. More people will be like, oh, okay, do you do that? More infrastructure. And then now we're in this virtual circle of more and more people cycling, which translates to less cars. And I think it will translate as well into more car share usage, as long as there's enough free. Important. Because people will start realizing that they don't need their car, actually.
I was gonna, and you both kind of brought this up like this. You're testing it out and then you're switching. Now, I will say, if you're buying a vehicle, going back to your example of the car, Venkatesh, you're making it as exciting and as, the test drives, right? Making it as exciting as possible, take you to the desert with this super cool car. So you come back and you have all these, I don't know, endorphins and dopamines and whatever, all happy hormones that then lead you to make this one purchase that now you're locked in for and you just made the mode shift. You make the mind shift on that trip and you made the mode shift. Now the challenge is with shared mobility, and just to be very clear, like for us, it's like public transport, right? Yes, it's called public transport, not shared mobility, but you're sharing a vehicle with others, car sharing, bike sharing, even scooter sharing, as long as the vehicle is shared. That is a very different thing, because you can make a decision every single time and you have to get them excited. So question, and this is where I'm struggling sometimes, is like, how do we get people to get that excited that they're committing fully? And committing fully would mean I get rid of one or all of my cars, right? And not buying into that. Because once I'm in there, I'm kind of like, I'm doing handcuffs. I'm handcuffed. I'm tied to this car that I just spent thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of dollars on, versus, one bike share trip that cost me €5. Like, how do we do that?
I think so. There's pleasure and enjoyment are really important things, and another is restriction. Actual politicians coming in and restricting car usage. I know it's controversial and it's difficult, but that's what really makes the difference. And the other day I posted something on LinkedIn, and a lady commented on it saying, for me it's really hard when it rains. I just can't take my bicycle. I just jump into my car because I know it's wrong. I know, but I still do it. And I'm like, well, what you need is an external force just making it so difficult. It makes it no sense. Or I'm making it really easy to do the other thing, which also sometimes includes not moving, working from home, working from their local office, working from something closer, just changing the way we live our lives, actually.
But what you're basically are saying, just making it fun and enjoyable and seamless on its own is not going to do the trick to get people. Like, that's what I'm putting words in your mouth, but that's kind of what you're saying. Like, yes, we need to do all of that, but just doing all of
Absolutely.
that will not change how we move around. Okay.
Yeah, because
Absolutely.
this
Yes.
is where I think this is where every other industry is also taking cues from. Like, those endorphins don't last forever, right? So everybody is focused on, and this is when I was going through this behavioral economics classes, one of the points that kept coming up was, if you want to change behavior based on people's economical choices, you have to bring down the number of decision points that you bring them to, right? So the least number of decision points, ideally just one. That's what happens with buying a car, right? So you buy a car, and then for the next 4 years, you're not thinking of buying a car anymore. So you just have to hit that fun level once. And once that conversion is done, that's it. You're pretty much not going to be off-roading for 5 years, right? So you're not going to have those happy hormones ever back, but you're bought, you're done, you're sealed for 5 years. And I think this is where it becomes, and when during COVID, the whole business model of subscription took off with shared mobility. And I thought that was very interesting how that got people to commit for a little longer and not getting them into like a decision point. And this is where I personally felt bike shares, city bike shares, not the shared scooters or free floating systems. It's about the dot bike share that we have in most cities. You have a subscription for an annual basis, and you don't pay every time you take the bike. So you're basically like, yeah, might as well use a bike because I'm anyways paid in, right? So that one time is when you have to make the most effort to get people to convert. Once they're converted for a year, they pretty much will get to the, and then once you get them at the end of the subscription, again, like any other subscription that we've seen everywhere else, it needs to be, positive. How, hey, you once you have, if what happens if you renew, how many people haven't renewed, right? So those points, yeah, I'm also like excited how the whole streaming world works, right? So now we have one, but people are not happy with just Disney or Hotstar or something else. They have so many more that they want to do, but once you have subscription, you're pretty much locked in for a longer term. So yeah,
I like the it's reducing the amount of decision points, but I was just the reverse, when you buy a car. So for the last 18 months, I worked with Pay by Phone, which is a parking company for cars. Okay. And a really interesting thing is, yes, people buy in and they have all these endorphins, and I just bought this like ridiculously expensive piece of metal that has all these bells and whistles, and it makes me so fancy. But then they just hate everything about it afterwards. I mean, if it's brand new car, fine, but the majority of cars are not brand new, keep in mind, right? Like 60% of the cars are used cars. And there's like, apart from parking, which is obviously a hassle, and every time a ding, 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 there's also like, I need to do maintenance. And then I have like in the UK, for instance, you have these, the annual check you need to do, which is obviously not at the same time as your insurance needs to be renewed. So now you also need to keep track of all these different things, all the different rules. People actually hate everything that comes with owning a car, with the exception of like, it's my own little steel bubble, I guess, that I bought for a lot of money. Even if it's secondhand, it's still a lot of money for most people. So there's like, part of me is like, is there a case for Modeshift if we're able to show people how super painful car ownership is? Like just like we were saying, you every time dinged, and so you have to get them excited every time. It's like the reverse, like every time you're like, oh my God, I have to deal with this again. Like, is there anything, I don't know, is anyone can think of an example?
I think there's a case. I mean, it's making this salient, right? Because this is not something that is being talked about. Nobody weighs, shall I rely on shared mobility and public transport or buy a car? Nobody does it. Nobody does a cost calculation of it. How much is it going to cost me if I do this versus that? So kind of prompting people to think about it a little bit is definitely, there's definitely value to it. And then on another kind of thing, if we know that people form kind of personal connections with a car, could shared mobility help people create connections with shared cars? Wouldn't there be something to work on?
The other example I just thought of is like, and I know we talked about it before we actually started recording, is that Seattle example where the West Seattle Bridge got closed. And all of a sudden, a 10-minute trip for people that lived in West Seattle became 90 minutes, which was the butt. And people just, if they could, they worked remotely. I think they opened the bicycle bridge right away, the active transportation, safe active transportation, which was way faster than anything else. So I'm like, there is, like, I guess, examples, just like with the pandemic, where public transport all of a sudden didn't feel safe. There's example where the pain of having a car and dealing with it becomes, but it still may mean that's only a portion of the population, right? That really then change and can change. I'm also saying, if you can work remotely in the North American context, it's often white collar. I guess not just in the North American. So then it becomes exclusive to a certain group that can shift their minds and their modes versus not everyone.
That's why we need loads of different offerings. Like we need a very, very reliable public transport as well. And then one with shared mobility options, with cycling options, so that everyone can adjust their mode to what they are capable of physically and to what their job requires. And just going back to the difficulties of owning a car, I think Paris, yes, it's getting increasingly difficult to own a car because Mayor Hidalgo is very ambitious with what she puts in place, and that's where people are. And the public transport is very good. Shared mobility offering is pretty good. Cycling paths are getting better and better, and that's where it becomes okay. I can actually do it. But then, again, since not everyone is connected to people using all these, it's most of the time is young, affluent, etc. So we need, when as behavior change makers or designers, service designers, we need to think, how do we bring in these other groups? How do we create experiential opportunities for these other groups that are overlooked? For start with, carrying responsibilities. Often people with lower incomes, they don't even think about cycling. I mean, this is complicated, but yeah.
I think both of you have been mentioning something around the saying that goes like, build it and they'll come, right? So You have infrastructure, you have visibility, you have social proof, you have peer pressure. You see those things working and existing. So you know you can rely on that. You know that you can go back and, the car sharing is always going to be there because it has been there for the last 5 years, and, a third of the city's population is a member of it. Bike share is there because it's been here for ages, since somebody moved into the city, right? So it's something that people gain confidence from. And the other point that I thought of was also, it's funny how we are totally different the way we make our economical budget decisions when we are on a holiday versus when we are every day doing, right? I would be, I don't, but in case I was driving every day to work, taking my school kids to school by my car and everything else, I go to a city like Vancouver, I go to a city like Paris, Seattle. Now I'm taking the bike, I'm taking the scooter, I'm taking the transit. I'm like, yeah, why couldn't you do that in your city again? Only if there you come back and say, like, I don't have any, there is no car sharing, there's no bike sharing. I'm like, okay, let's put something in place. But then if you're in Vancouver, you never took a bike share, you went to Paris and all you did is like bike around, and then you come back and you can't stop talking about how friendly it is for people to walk and people to bike. And I'm like, how did you do it? You had more budget, right? So you could spend more when you're on holiday, but you didn't.
So true. It's so true. And I mean, we do know of some cases, right, where people come back and are like, I want to have it in my own community, and I build it. Like in some, like Sparrow is a prime example. Tried it out in I think Spain, got really excited, was like, we gotta have this in BC, and built a small scooter share. So that's one thing, right? You build it yourself. But I think the other thing is, there's a very good point around, and it's also, there's that tie again to the fun and the enjoyment, because on vacation you do it because it's fun and it's enjoyable, and you probably have a little bit more time to figure out how the hell you're actually doing this, which you generally don't have in your day to day.
Just that's what we said at the beginning, right? When we're on holidays, we are out of our routine, so we need to stop and think. That I mean, this disruption of routine is just so powerful for getting people to change.
And also, we don't like it as humans at all. It's like this, it's this really interesting thing, right? That's where there's change management professionals, because we actually hate when our life disrupts. But that's when, well, there's the other thing, which is what I tell my daughter. This is when you actually learn. This is when we still learn, but we kind of tend to, I guess, want to minimize that, because we are just like on our optimized life. Let's just call it that, on our optimized lives, that we are like, I don't have time for this, even though it actually would change. So there is maybe, and just coming back to our initial, like, is it from Mindshift to Modeshift, or is it Mindshift and Modeshift, or what is it exactly? I don't exactly know that I have a good answer at this point, because it's both. It really truly is both for me. But if we can't get you to change your mind, you will never change the mode. Maybe that's my personal closing statement. I'll let you each say a sentence or two or three about this, but maybe my personal one is, if I can't change your mind, you will never change your mode.
Is there's no magic bullet and a single thing that will bring about change. We need multiple things at the same time: infrastructure, knowledge, motivation, disruption. We need to multiply pressure points, and then the change can happen.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I personally have experienced forceful mode shift first when I first moved to Vancouver, and that has resulted in me like having a mind shift. But it's only those moments, and as both of you noted, those moments of disruptions like COVID, people moving, something like that, right? So happening personally to people, but we can't be like planning for those. So I think, hold on. I think my my money, if I could bet, would be on creating elements that would have Mindshift first, like infrastructure, visibility, reliability, having the services in place, and then getting people to then looking for like Modeshift. I don't know. I just feel it's how we could plan and then hope for some disruption and then be ready for it. Than be like, okay, we weren't ready. For example, if the systems weren't ready for remote work, then pretty much it was a big challenge for people to move. But since everybody had some level of experience with phone calls and teleconferencing and Zoom and whatnot, people could get to remote work. So there has to be that system in place. Whether we do mode shift before or after, the mind shift has to come before on the planning side.
I was like, I could go on forever because you also just mentioned something that I think we should just be okay with change and disruption. And you mentioned a forceful disruption. And I'm 100% sure you were not super excited that this was this forceful disruption. There was probably frustration and internal conflict. And I think that's maybe the other key piece. And we don't, at least in North America, specifically in Canada, where we apologize constantly for everything, we do not like the conflict that comes with this. And I think it has to, and we have to maybe as a group and profession also be okay with it, that there just will be. Like, it's disrupting potentially a lot of people's life. Like Mary Hidalgo, she's not the hero for everyone. Yes, now she's probably passed, but there's a lot of people who don't like what she did. And she's okay with it, which I think is wonderful. It's probably quality of a leader and quality of leaders that we need if we really want to get to Modeshift. I see you're nodding, Natalia. Do you want to say one last thing?
You're going to start me on things, but yeah, I think it's absolutely that. We need courageous politicians and leaders that will be happy to engineer disruption, and then we can kind of not fall through it, obviously, but kind of crawl through it and get to change.
All right. There we go. That's our first edition of the micro webinar on Mindshift and Modeshift. We'll see you next time.